The veil was not just a symbol of purity, it was a blindfold, and behind it, something ancient fed on obedience. You were never meant to hear this. Not from me, not from anyone. Because this isn't just another lost-in-time horror, it's a rupture. The tear in the delicate fabric that separates piety from power, mercy from manipulation. In 1854, in the remote silence of Wisconsin's frontier, the Catholic Church consecrated a new convent, St. Mary's, a beacon of charity, discipline, and divine service, or so they said. But the soil they built on wasn't just land. It was memory. It was warning. Native tribes had once called the nearby woods Wakanaga, the place where the trees weep. They refused to camp there after sundown, said the wind cried in the voice of buried daughters, said the owls didn't blink. The church didn't listen. And within just 8 years of its founding, 23 nuns vanished. No bodies, no graves, no records. Their disappearances were explained away. Reassignments to distant missions, illness, sudden divine callings. But the documents hidden in the Diocese of Milwaukee archives told another story, one buried behind Latin script and sealed wax. Letters never meant to be read. Confessions smuggled between novices. A blueprint for systemic silence. What you're about to hear is drawn from those forbidden records and from the testimony of 3 separate church inspectors whose careers and lives ended abruptly after what they discovered inside St. Mary's walls. This story has been called heretical, dangerous, possessed. But the only possession here is power and how it feeds. Quietly, daily, devouring from within. You've entered the threshold now, and you will not leave unchanged. They said she was a woman of God, tall, stern, pale as frost. Mother Catherine Murphy, the first and last Mother Superior of St. Mary's Convent. But those who met her in person often spoke of a sensation, not fear, not awe, something colder, a feeling like you were being measured. She had served in Boston and Charleston, even, allegedly, under papal authority in Rome, though no documentation confirms it. She arrived in Wisconsin with nothing but a single leather-bound prayer book and a silver crucifix whose design does not match any known Catholic order. The bishop praised her as a pillar of divine discipline, but the local clergy kept their distance. There were whispers that she never blinked during prayer, that her footsteps made no sound on stone, that she never ate in public, only behind closed doors. 20 sisters followed her into the wilderness. Most were young Irish immigrants, barely in their 20s, fleeing famine, orphanhood, or scandal. They came seeking sanctuary, purpose, God. What they found was a system, precise, immaculate, unbending. The convent's daily routine began at 3 a.m. sharp, matins, 7 rounds of prayers a day, cold floors, no eye contact, no speech between meals, flagellation for broken silence. Their rooms held no mirrors, their letters were censored, their names replaced. Agnes became Sister of Sorrow, Bernadette, Sister of Obedience, Teresa, Sister of Silence. They were told it was tradition, that the old orders demanded such humility, but none of them had ever heard of these names before, and over time the convent's Gothic wings became something else. Not sanctuary, but labyrinth. Corridors that didn't lead where they should, locked doors that were never used, but always cold to the touch. A bell tower that rang at impossible hours even when the ropes were untouched. But the sisters endured, because that's what they were taught. Suffering is sanctity, pain is purification, obedience is love. They believed it, They had to, because the alternative was something far worse than disobedience. It was awakening. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from fear. The silence at St. Mary's wasn't holy. It was manufactured, enforced like a ritual, sharpened like a weapon. By winter of 1856, it was clear something was watching, and not all the sisters believed it was God. Each night, the air grew heavier, the corridors darker than they should have been. Candles flickered in ways no breeze could explain, and still no one spoke, because when they did, something happened. It began with Sister Josephine. She was the first to ask where Agnes had gone, openly, at breakfast. A wooden bowl cracked in the silence that followed. Sister Margaret, the infirmary keeper, didn't look up. Mother Catherine's spoon paused mid-air. "We do not question God's will," she said. That night, Josephine was reassigned to the cellar, alone, to catalog old parish records. The next morning, she didn't come to chapel. Mother Catherine told the others she'd been sent forward, an expression no one had heard before or since. But Sister Mary Collins had found something, a tiny scrap of cloth, Josephine's habit, caught in the splintered frame of the cellar door. It was torn, and it was stained with something far too dark to be wine. After that, the silence became doctrine. Sister Teresa stopped asking questions. Sister Bernadette began writing prayers backward, claiming it kept her safe. Even Sister Elizabeth, once cheerful, grew pale and thin. She stopped eating during daylight, stopped blinking during prayer. Some nights, they heard singing in the west wing, where no sisters slept. A low chant. Not Latin, not English. Something else. Older. The orphans in the chapel school began drawing strange symbols in the margins of their catechisms. Circles with eyes, women with no mouths, towers with no doors. And the bells. They began to toll at 3:33 a.m. Always 3 times. Always followed by the sound of footsteps. Not nuns, not boots. Bare feet on stone. No one ever saw who they belonged to, but one by one, the sisters began to disappear. And always the explanation was the same. She was called. But the question that haunted those who remained wasn't where the sisters went. It was what was calling them. It wasn't just the vanishings. It was the way they were erased, like chalk brushed off a slate, as if they'd never existed. Names were removed from ledgers. Beds were reassigned by nightfall. Prayer cards disappeared from the chapel walls. But human memory is harder to purge, especially when guilt is involved. Sister Mary Collins began keeping a secret journal, hidden beneath a loose stone behind the altar. In it, she recorded everything. The vanishings, the changes in behavior, the things she heard beneath the floorboards during evening prayers. One entry read, "They are taken after confession. Always confession. I think she selects them based on what they confess, or how much they resist." Another entry. "I woke up to find Sister Anne staring at the ceiling, unmoving. When I touched her, she whispered, 'Don't look in the mirror after Vespers.' Then she screamed and wouldn't stop until Mother Catherine came." The journal ended in mid-sentence, halfway through a line that read, "Last night, I saw someone who looked like Sister Agnes, but her eyes..." That page was never finished, and Sister Mary was never seen again. The nuns who remained grew thinner, paler. Some refused food, others refused silence. They whispered prayers in languages they never learned. And when Sister Margaret laid her hands on the sick, they began to shiver, even in heat. Mother Catherine's sermons changed too, no longer centered on Christ or charity, but on cleansing, obedience, and the tearing down of self. She said pain was holy, that suffering was the furnace of transformation, that the world outside was illusion, and only within these stone walls could the soul be made real. Some believed her. Others began to doubt their own memories. Had there ever really been a Sister Agnes? Had Sister Josephine even existed? Or were those names, those faces, part of a test? Doubt is the final form of control, because once a person questions their own mind, you no longer need bars. The prison lives inside them. St. Mary's had become a fortress not of God, but of obedience forged through fear, and whatever spirit had taken residence there was feeding. Not just on bodies, but on belief itself. They thought it was just isolation, that the silence of the woods, the dim of the stone chapel, the relentless rhythm of bells and penance was merely what one endured to serve God. But something older than doctrine had crept into the foundation. It began with the mirrors, everyone removed. Sister Elizabeth claimed it was an act of humility, to keep our eyes fixed inward, she said. But Sister Teresa remembered the way Sister Anne had stared into the glass, her lips moving without sound. Her reflection, moving out of sync. Then came the symbols, carved beneath pews, etched into candle holders, woven subtly into the embroidery of habits. Sister Margaret called them herbal runes meant for healing and protection. But Sister Mary knew better. They weren't Irish, they weren't Latin, and they weren't meant to protect. One night the bells rang, not at 3 a.m. for matins, but at 2:13, a time unmarked in their schedule. The sisters rose in confusion, dressing in silence, filing into the chapel. Mother Catherine stood at the altar, her face lit only by flame. No prayers, no readings, just one sentence. The blood must speak. She produced a knife, not for self-harm, not for theatrics, but to open Sister Josephine's palm. A drop of blood spilled onto the altar cloth. It soaked in like ink into paper, disappeared, as if consumed. After that night, Sister Josephine stopped speaking entirely. Her gaze became unfocused. She responded only to commands. The others said she was blessed, but Sister Mary wrote in her hidden journal, "She is not Josephine anymore." Then came the fasts, days without food, punishments of silence that lasted weeks, isolation in the lower chambers, the coldest rooms where no light reached and sound was swallowed by stone, and always the same message. Your will must break before your soul can rise. One by one, they began to repeat that phrase, not in defiance, but in submission, like a creed, like a curse. And outside the convent, life continued. Families saw the black-robed women moving through the village, always smiling, always helpful. No one saw what was happening behind the chapel doors. No one heard the whispers in the walls. No one asked, because everyone believed St. Mary's was a sanctuary. But sanctuaries can also be prisons, especially when they're built not to protect what's within, but to contain what should never be released. By 1857, something had changed in the way the nuns moved. It was subtle, a hesitation at thresholds, a synchrony in their steps that hadn't been there before. They no longer seemed like individuals, but pieces of a single thing. The orphanage still functioned. The infirmary remained open. Mass was held every Sunday. but the light in their eyes had dimmed, as if something inside had been hollowed out. And something else had filled the space. Sister Mary Collins kept her journal hidden beneath a loose stone in the laundry room floor. In it she wrote, "I no longer dream in my own voice. When I sleep I hear her, and when I wake, I do not always remember who I am." The her was never named, but every nun knew who she meant. Mother Catherine. No longer the strict but loving superior, she had become something else. Her sermons grew darker, less scripture, more revelation. She spoke not of God, but of order, of sacrifice, of the true architecture of salvation. The crucifix above the altar was replaced with a carved symbol, a wheel of thorns entwined with 7 eyes. She called it the seal of purity. No one questioned her, because to question was to vanish. Sister Hélène had asked too many questions. Where did the orphans go when they were adopted, though no families ever visited? Why did the infirmary sometimes smell of burning hair? Her questions stopped when she did. One morning, her bed was made perfectly, but no one remembered seeing her leave. Sister Mary wrote, "I called her name during evening prayers, not aloud, only in my thoughts, and still Mother Catherine turned to me, as if she heard." The walls themselves seemed to close in. A secret staircase was found behind the old linen closet. It led nowhere, just a small room with no windows, no doors, just walls covered in scratches, as if someone had tried to climb through the stone. That night, Sister Margaret locked the closet. No one spoke of it again, yet they all began to dream of being buried alive. Not in earth, but in ritual, in obedience, in a theology no longer holy but hallowed. One by one, the young women who had once sung hymns with laughter now mumbled verses in a tongue no longer taught in seminaries. Latin mixed with something older, a language meant not for worship, but for binding. And still, no letters came, no responses. No one from the outside noticed the growing void. Because from the outside, St. Mary's still looked like a miracle. But inside, they were already mourning the women they once were, and something was preparing to take their place. There are places on earth where silence is not peace, but a warning. By late 1857, the silence at St. Mary's had become unbearable. Not just the absence of voices, but the absence of resistance. The new postulants, girls barely past childhood, arrived with smiles and letters from home. Within weeks, their expressions dulled. They stopped asking questions. They stopped saying their names. Instead, they began referring to themselves as numbers. "I am 7, whispered a girl once known as Sister Claire. 7 serves the will." No one taught them this, at least not in daylight. The rhythm of prayers had changed. The times remained the same, matins, lauds, vespers, compline, but the words had shifted. Psalms gave way to mantras. Cleanse the body, silence the self, bind the light. Mother Catherine no longer dined with the other sisters. She took her meals in the old rectory, alone, where the windows had been painted black. Only Sister Margaret was permitted inside. It was Margaret who began preparing the initiations. They called them cleansings. No one spoke of what happened in the stone cellar beneath the infirmary. But afterward the girls emerged changed, shaking, eyes unfocused. They whispered phrases they'd never heard before, things found in no Bible. Sister Mary Collins wrote in her final hidden journal entry, "They are no longer trying to hide it. The rituals are not Catholic, not even Christian. I saw the markings on Sister Teresa's skin, not bruises, symbols, as if drawn by heat, not ink." Then the journal ends. No further pages were found. Mother Catherine began choosing sisters for what she called the Ninefold offering. 9 women, 1 per month, each to ascend through silence. There was no explanation, only selection. And once chosen, they were never seen again. No funerals, no goodbyes, only a candle lit in the chapel and the sound of the chapel bell at midnight. Locals began to speak in hushed tones. The priest who once blessed the convent stopped returning their letters. A widow from town who brought bread to the orphanage was turned away by Sister Margaret, her hands stained with what looked like clay, but smelled like copper. Still, the church said nothing, because the church had seen this before. Not officially, not in writing, but in whispers passed from bishop to bishop about sacred houses where discipline had decayed into devotion of another kind, with a line between saint and Sybil blurred, where women once bound to Christ became something else entirely. It was not a convent anymore, not in spirit, not in structure. By early 1858, St. Mary's resembled something far older and far darker than any Catholic institution ever intended. The chapel's crucifix had been replaced, not openly, not during Mass, but at night. The original carved Christ had vanished, replaced with a twisted effigy of wood and bone hung upside down behind the altar. The sisters were told not to speak of it. They obeyed, because by then, obedience wasn't a choice. It was survival. Rituals were now conducted in the dead hours between midnight and 3 a.m. The chapel windows, once filled with soft images of saints and angels, had been coated from within, stained black with soot and candle grease. No light came in, no sound went out. Locals began reporting strange noises from the woods surrounding the convent. Not wolves, not wind, chanting, low, rhythmic, feminine. A hunter swore he saw figures dancing by torchlight beneath the trees, their faces hidden by white veils, their feet bare despite the frost. When he returned the next morning to find tracks, there were none. Inside, Sister Mary Collins had been placed on probation. Her questioning nature had drawn the ire of Mother Catherine. She was assigned to solitary tasks, cleaning the east wing, maintaining the root cellar, scrubbing the walls of the dormitory where younger sisters now slept in perfect silence. One evening, she heard soft sobbing behind a locked door. She paused, pressed her ear to the wood, and whispered, "Who's there?" The crying stopped. Then a voice, unfamiliar, answered from the dark. "You are not alone, but you must pretend to be." She never found that door again. The hallway where it stood no longer existed the next day. The orphanage was no longer operational. The children were gone. When asked, Sister Elizabeth smiled and said they had all been adopted. By who, she never said. No records were kept, no visitors recalled. A traveling priest sent by the diocese finally arrived that spring, Father Matthias, old and skeptical. He stayed for one night. The next morning, he left without saying Mass. He refused to speak of what he had seen, but he sent one final letter to the bishop before resigning his post entirely. They no longer pray to our God. I fear they no longer remember his name. The records say Sister Margaret was a healer, but her remedies changed. Gone were the tinctures of willow bark and honey. Gone were the simple poultices and lavender teas. She now dealt in things unnamed. Roots that bled sap the color of rust. Ointments made from crushed beetles and thick black oil. Salves that burned before they soothed. She spoke less in English, more in Latin, and eventually, not at all. Sister Elizabeth began whispering new prayers, prayers not found in any Catholic book. They were rhythmic, ancient, and oddly melodic, like lullabies for something that never slept. By summer of 1858, the garden grew at impossible speeds. Vegetables the size of heads, flowers that bloomed in frost. One nun wrote in her journal, later recovered by historians, "The carrots came up red as blood. The squash split down the middle like opened mouths. Sister Margaret says they are signs of abundance." I see only warnings. Inside the convent, candles no longer burned with steady yellow light. They flickered strangely, blue and green, casting warped shadows on the walls. The sisters moved in lockstep now. All smiles had vanished. Even the bells sounded different. The chimes were slower, deeper. Sometimes they rang without being touched. One night, Sister Mary Collins awoke to find her bed surrounded. 10 figures stood silently, their habits soaked as if they had walked through water. But it hadn't rained. Their hands were folded in prayer, eyes closed, lips moving soundlessly. She dared not scream. In the morning, no one spoke of it. Later that week, Sister Mary attempted to leave, to walk the mile to the local postmaster and telegraph her cousin in Boston. She never arrived. Her cousin never received the message. But the postmaster would later report, long after the convent was abandoned, that on that day, a barefoot nun had stood across the road from his office, unmoving, for hours. Staring, as if waiting for permission. She vanished when a cart passed by, and when the dust settled, she was gone. That winter, a final shipment of altar supplies arrived for St. Mary's. The delivery man was confused, because the invoice was signed not by Mother Catherine, not by Sister Elizabeth, but by someone no one had ever heard of. A name not on any registry. A name that appeared again, years later, in Vatican archives, linked to 3 other vanished convents. In February of 1859, the diocesan visitor arrived. Father Thomas Delacroix, a man known for discretion, a fixer, not a crusader. He'd been sent by the Milwaukee Archdiocese after irregular reports emerged. Nothing concrete, just whispers. The bishop claimed it was routine, but Father Delacroix knew better. He arrived unannounced. The snow was high that morning, the convent's grounds buried under a pale silence. The gates opened before he knocked. A young nun stood there, barefoot. She smiled too wide. "Welcome, Father," she said in a voice like brittle parchment. "We've been expecting you." Inside, nothing was out of place, at first. He was shown to a guest room, offered tea, given time to rest. But the chapel was empty when he asked to attend Compline. The infirmary locked, and the orphanage quiet, too quiet. He requested records, sacramental logs, letters from Rome, transfer documentation. Mother Catherine assured him everything was in order, but her eyes, those pale, pitiless eyes, never left his face. Watching for something. Testing. That night, he ventured into the east wing unescorted. The hallways were wrong. Too long, as if the architecture had shifted. Doors that should have led to dormitories opened into closets filled with nothing but buckets of dried black wax. A scraping sound followed him. Soft, deliberate, as if someone were dragging a finger along the stone walls, just out of sight. In the library, he found something sealed behind the fireplace. An alcove, hidden by a false panel. Inside, books. Not in Latin, not in any language he recognized. Their pages were filled with ink drawings, spirals, eyes, anatomies of unfamiliar creatures. At the back, a cloth bundle. When he unwrapped it, he found human hair, braided, neatly, with small bones tied like beads. He replaced it. When he turned, Sister Margaret stood in the doorway. "You weren't meant to see that," she whispered. Her hands were coated in what looked like ash, but it smelled sweet, like honey and rot. Father Delacroix left before dawn. He told no one. But 3 weeks later, he wrote to Rome, a letter never published but cited in internal Vatican memos. "I have seen things at St. Mary's that defy church, reason, and flesh. If they are still there, It is not by God's will, but something older, and something deeply patient. 3 months after Father Delacroix's silent exodus, a new priest arrived. But this one wasn't sent by the Archdiocese. He wasn't even expected. Father Malachi Quinn, Irish-born, Chicago-trained, and known in underground circles as the Dog of God. He had no parish, no formal assignment, but he had a reputation for investigating what others refused to name. He entered St. Mary's under the pretense of offering Lenten assistance. His letters, uncovered decades later by an anonymous Vatican archivist, tell of what he truly found. "This is no longer a convent," he wrote. "It is a crucible. What is being refined, I do not yet know." From the moment he crossed the threshold, the nuns treated him like an intruder, not with hostility, but with blankness. Their eyes shimmered with calm. Dead calm. The children in the orphanage would not speak. One girl, around 7, had teeth marks on her arms. When he asked who hurt her, she simply whispered, "The lady who wears the other skin." He tried to confront Mother Catherine directly. She welcomed him into her office, a high-ceilinged room that smelled of myrrh and wet iron. Behind her desk hung a painting, not of Christ, but of an unmarked woman with a black veil and a mouth sewn shut. "You've come to save them," she said without looking up. "But they're already spoken for." She handed him tea. He refused. Her smile flickered. Father Quinn later wrote that the tea had a film across the top, oily and violet. Not normal. He began conducting secret mass in the woods nearby. Each night he gathered 1 or 2 of the younger nuns in confidence, urging them to speak freely. Some cried, some simply stared. But one, Sister Helena, spoke. In hushed panic, she described nightly visitations in the cellar. Strange prayers in a tongue she could not name. The pressure of hands on her chest while she slept. A bell that rang from beneath the chapel floor. "I don't think I'm dreaming, Father," she said. "But if I am, the others are dreaming with me, and it's the same dream." That night, Quinn tried to leave with her. They packed a bag, slipped out after complaint. But at the edge of the woods, Helena froze. She looked back and began whispering a Latin phrase over and over. "Ossa venient, sanguis manet, ossa venient." Bones will come. Blood remains. She collapsed, eyes rolled back, body seizing, and he dragged her to town. She would survive, but never speak again. And Father Quinn? He vanished a week later. The official story was simple. Father Malachi Quinn, called away suddenly on urgent church business, left behind a short note thanking St. Mary's for their hospitality. But the handwriting didn't match his own. And Sister Helena, now housed in a Jesuit-run infirmary in Milwaukee, never saw him again. Her medical records described her condition as functional mutism with catatonic episodes. She hadn't spoken since the night he tried to save her. But every evening at 9:00 p.m., she would scratch the same symbol into her bedsheets, over and over. An eye with a downward-pointing cross inside it. The same symbol, years later, discovered beneath the altar stone of St. Mary's Chapel. You see, what happened next was no longer whispered. It was institutionalized. Mother Catherine's teachings took on a new tone. The sermons were no longer just Catholic. They became esoteric. References to divine flesh, to the silent bride, to blood that sees. One surviving text, now locked in the basement archives of Marquette University, contains a line so disturbing it has been quoted only in academic footnotes. They descended not from heaven, but from the hush between pulses. Their throne is built from minds, not matter. By spring of 1857, several townspeople began voicing quiet concern. Children at the orphanage were growing thinner. Several stopped attending Sunday Mass altogether. The nuns were rarely seen outside the convent walls. When Father Grigory, a Russian Orthodox priest stationed 30 miles east, attempted a goodwill visit, he was told at the gate that Mother is in perpetual silence. She no longer sees outsiders. He left unsettled. Weeks later, he would describe to his diocese a dream. The chapel door opened not with hinges, but with a scream. And inside, not pews, but rows of kneeling figures with hoods made of skin. Meanwhile, Sister Margaret, once a healer, began forbidding the use of modern medicine. Only blessed mixtures were allowed: black paste, bitter tinctures, and ashes from burned prayer scrolls. Some orphans were made to consume these mixtures daily. One child, later adopted by a traveling Baptist couple, would wake screaming into adulthood, his throat raw, repeating the phrase, "The bell is in my stomach. The bell is in my stomach." By midsummer, 5 more nuns had transferred without a trace. All young, all silent. But what no one noticed was that the chapel's basement had recently been sealed with brick and mortar. The entrance hidden beneath the organ, and the bell, once used to summon prayer, now rang at stranger hours. Hours no prayer was meant for. It began with a scent, not incense, not wood smoke, but something older, almost metallic, that lingered in the air after evening prayers. Sister Lucia, the newest arrival from Cincinnati, noticed it first. She had arrived eager, full of pious zeal and deeply devout, but within weeks she had grown pale and withdrawn. She confided once in a hushed whisper to Sister Mary Collins, "They don't pray here anymore. They listen." "What do you mean?" Mary had asked. Lucia's eyes darted toward the chapel. "You'll hear it too, if you kneel long enough." That night, Mary obeyed her curiosity. She waited after Compline, hidden behind the side altar. At first, silence. Then, movement. Not footsteps. Dragging. The chapel door creaked open on its own, and in shuffled a procession of veiled figures, 8 in number, their habits stained, not with dirt, but with dark, unidentifiable blotches. None of them lit candles. They moved to the altar in perfect synchrony, kneeling in silence. Then, the bell rang. But this was no ordinary bell. It emitted no sound. Yet Mary felt its tolling in her bones, a low-frequency hum that made her stomach churn. And then came the voices. Not spoken, but inside her mind, disjointed phrases, some in Latin, others in languages she could not name. Ego sum os. The womb becomes the tomb. She waits behind the veil. Drink the eye, eat the name. Mary collapsed. When she awoke, she was in the infirmary, her ears bleeding, her eyes bloodshot. Sister Margaret stood over her, expression unreadable. "You had a fainting spell. You mustn't skip your broth again, Sister Mary." That night, Mary wrote a letter to the Archdiocese. She never received a reply, because the convent had already diverted all outgoing mail. The postmaster, Mr. Harold Finch, had begun delivering their letters in sealed burlap sacks directly to the bishop's carriage every 3rd Sunday. And inside St. Mary's, change accelerated. Mother Catherine no longer walked. She was carried. 4 nuns, always hooded, bore her on a covered litter, her voice issuing commands from behind thick curtains. Rumor whispered she had not been seen in weeks, that her face was no longer the same. One nun, Sister Celeste, swore she heard multiple voices when Catherine spoke, as if something else had begun answering with her mouth. That was the last night anyone saw Sister Celeste. Her bed remained made. Her rosary sat on the pillow, but on the wall, written in charcoal, were the words, "She makes them empty to fill herself." By summer 1857, St. Mary's had become a place of whispers and shadows. No laughter, no birds near the chapel, Even the wind seemed to avoid its bell tower. The villagers, once skeptical but cordial, now crossed themselves when walking past. Children dared each other to touch the wrought iron gate. None lasted more than 5 seconds. Something had changed. Inside the convent, Sister Mary Collins began to record what she could in the margins of her Bible. She could not write letters anymore. They were all intercepted. But scripture, they allowed. So she wrote her own gospel in the cracks of the word. Blessed are the vanished, for they are beyond correction. The eyes on the walls move when no one watches. She speaks through us now. And then the dreams began. Not nightmares. Something worse. Sisters described the same vision, a great eye opening in the sky above the chapel, bleeding light that poured down like liquid fire. A voice, neither male nor female, speaking backwards and forward at once. And beneath the floor, movement. Mother Catherine declared it was divine revelation. But Sister Teresa, one of the oldest, whispered to Mary, "That is not the voice of God. That is the scream of something buried." That night, Teresa did not show up for Vespers. Her bed was stripped, her shoes remained. A single lock of her gray hair was nailed to the chapel door, held by a single black nail. And yet, none spoke of her again. Not even in whispers. New statues began appearing in the chapel. Not of saints, but feminine figures with obscured faces, veiled, headless, or eyeless. Each cradled a small child, upside down. Sister Margaret claimed they were Eastern saints from the old rites, but Mary knew better. One night, cleaning the altar, she found a name carved beneath the wood, Mater Tenebris, Mother of Shadows. She tried to look it up in the convent library. All books on saints had been removed. In their place were volumes written in languages she didn't recognize, spiral symbols in the margins, strange diagrams, and pages that stank of mildew and iron. Then she found it, a hand-bound book tucked behind a shelf. She who enters through hunger. Inside, the same phrases from her dreams, the same sigil etched into the back of Sister Agnes's old rosary. She dropped it and ran, but someone had been watching. That night, her candle was missing, and on her pillow, a small wax ear. Hollow. The ear wasn't just wax. Sister Mary realized that the closer she brought it to her own, the more it pulsed, like it was listening with her. It was warm, and when she tried to toss it into the chapel furnace the next morning, she found it again that night. Back on her pillow, upright, waiting. She didn't sleep. At dawn, she approached Sister Margaret in the infirmary. "Do you know anything about these objects?" Mary asked, showing the small wax ear. Margaret's hands trembled for the first time Mary could remember. Her voice, usually sharp and clinical, was barely audible. "They begin with ears, then eyes, then tongues. Once you're remade, you serve in silence." "What does that mean?" But Margaret had already turned away. She began grinding dried henbane into a powder with alarming speed. "You must never speak of this again, if she knows you found it." Mary didn't wait for the end of the sentence. She left the infirmary and ran to the garden. Only the old statue of Saint Cecilia stood there now. The others had been removed. But Saint Cecilia's face was missing, sanded off. In its place, someone had carved a crude spiral. Later that day, while peeling potatoes in the kitchen with Sister Helena, a younger nun, Mary asked about the statue. Helena paused, blade still against the skin of a red potato. Saint Cecilia was the first to hear it, the music. That's why her face is gone. Mary blinked. "What music?" Helena's eyes watered, as if something was playing in her mind only she could hear. "It starts as a chant, then a scream, then it becomes you." Mary dropped the peeler. That night, she tried to leave. She waited until Compline ended, snuck through the side hallway, and made it to the back door, the one that led toward the old woods. But the door didn't open. The keyhole was gone. It had been sealed from the inside, bricked over, painted to match the wood. She, too, turned around and saw the hallway shift. Not like in a dream, not metaphor. The angles changed. The corridor grew longer. The lamps flickered and dimmed, then grew brighter than flame. Something unseen stepped behind her, heavy, wet footsteps that echoed without a body. She ran. Back through the changing halls, through the cloisters, back to the dormitory, only to find her bed replaced. Where her name had been etched, a new plate, Sister Clara Valens, arrived last week from the Minnesota Mission. Mary stood there, breath caught in her throat. She had been replaced. The next morning, Sister Mary did not speak during breakfast, not because of devotion, but fear. No one addressed her. No one seemed to notice she existed. Even Sister Margaret passed her without recognition. It was as if her name had been erased, not just from the roster, but from memory itself. She left a spoon on the table, hoping someone would comment. No one did. She whispered, "Good morning," to Sister Helena. No reply. She reached out to touch her sleeve. Helena turned away, as if from a breeze. Mary sat alone in chapel. No one claimed her usual spot. It was then she realized, this wasn't punishment. This was the next stage. The silence wasn't enforced. It was embedded. By mid-afternoon, the infirmary bell rang. 3 sharp tolls, not the usual signal for a sick child or a wound. 3 tolls meant containment. Mary followed the sound, moving through the West Wing corridors. Outside the infirmary, a group of nuns stood frozen. Inside, Sister Clara Valens, the girl whose name now adorned Mary's bed, thrashed violently, limbs flailing, mouth foaming. Margaret stood over her with a leather-bound volume open, reading in Latin. Not prayers, but something else. A language older, sharper. Sister Elizabeth held Clara's arms, lips moving in synchronization with Margaret. A strange hum began vibrating through the floorboards, like the entire room was breathing. Mary stepped closer, and the moment her shadow crossed the threshold, Clara's eyes locked onto her, not at her face, at her ear.
"She still hears!"
Clara screamed.
"She didn't take it out!"
Chaos exploded. Clara broke free from Elizabeth's grasp and lunged. She reached for Mary's face, but Margaret struck her across the temple with the heavy book. Clara dropped instantly. Not dead, but still. Silence followed. Then Margaret spoke, calmly, deliberately. "We must remove her tongue. She's too far gone now." Elizabeth nodded. "We'll prepare the chapel." Mary stepped back, heart pounding. Margaret turned to the other nuns. "Tell the sisters this was a fever-induced seizure. She'll be kept in isolation until the body is clean." Until the body is clean. Mary fled. This time not toward escape, but into the records room. A forbidden space, locked, but she had once seen where Elizabeth hid the keys. She fumbled with the iron ring of keys, opened the door, and entered. Inside were not just books, but boxes, marked only with years, some open, some sealed in wax. She opened one from 1855. Inside, faded rosaries, a handkerchief with bloodstains, a page torn from a diary. "I still remember my name. I keep repeating it so they can't take it. My name is Sister Agnes. My name is Sister Agnes." Mary dropped the page. From the corner of the room came a low moan. Then a voice. "They made me forget mine." She turned slowly. The records room was supposed to be empty, a vault for documentation, not habitation. But in the shadows, behind the stacked crates and cracked hymnals, sat a figure, bent, wrapped in a soiled woolen blanket, face obscured by long matted hair. The smell hit her first, damp linen, decay, and the bitter stench of iron. Not just rot, long confinement. Sister Mary stepped forward instinctively. "Who are you?" The figure stirred, and the voice, raspy, hollow, echoed against the stone. "I was Sister Claire, but they made me someone else." She didn't look older, just unraveled. A woman unraveled at the edges by silence, like thread pulled from a habit too many times. "How did you survive?" Mary whispered. "I forgot too much to leave, but not enough to serve." Then Claire's eyes met hers, and they were startlingly lucid. "You still know your name? That's your danger." Mary knelt. "Tell me what happened. Why are they doing this?" Claire laughed, a short, cruel bark. "Because we're useful." She gestured toward the shelves. "Those aren't just records. They're replacements." Mary followed her gaze and realized every box was labeled not just with years, but initials, SAOBWCMTD, initials of the missing. And then she saw it. A new crate, untouched, marked with MC, her own. They keep what's left. Hair, bone, a word said too loud, a prayer misremembered. They burn the body, but they keep the echo. Mary's breath caught. Claire reached into her blanket and retrieved something wrapped in cloth. A silver bell. Delicate. Dentless. Unused. This was mine. Before I became nobody. Ring it only when it's too late. Then Claire leaned forward, whispering one word so quietly Mary barely heard it. Below. Suddenly, footsteps. Multiple. Purposeful. Approaching the records room. Claire vanished behind the crates like a specter returning to its grave. Mara, he rose, grabbed the bell, and extinguished the lantern just as the door creaked open. Silhouetted in the frame stood Mother Catherine. "I had hoped you would stay away from this room, Sister Mary," she said softly. "Curiosity is a dangerous indulgence." Behind her, Sister Margaret held something in her hand. Long, metallic, a branding iron. The tip glowed faintly in the candlelight. "Let us show you what devotion truly costs." The branding iron hissed as Sister Margaret stepped forward, its faint heat illuminating her gaunt features with a ghostly flicker. But Mother Catherine raised her hand. "Not yet." Sister Margaret stopped mid-step, her grip firm but obedient. "Sister Mary still believes this is a place of service," the Mother Superior said softly. "It is mercy to let her shed that illusion herself." Mary stood frozen. The bell from Claire clutched so tightly her palm ached. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "We took vows." "Yes," Catherine said, stepping inside. "But not your vows." The air thickened. Mother Catherine moved closer, her voice a low chant now. Hypnotic, ancient. "What we serve is older than Rome, older than Jerusalem. Before the Son walked among men, the daughters already bound the blood." She motioned toward the crates again. "You think they're gone. Agnes, Bernardet, Teresa. But they are here. We made them permanent." Mary backed up slowly toward the far wall, her hand brushing something cold and iron. A hinge. A trapdoor. Barely noticeable, half hidden beneath a discarded choir robe. Her heart pounded. Was this what Claire meant by below? But then Sister Margaret moved again, quicker than expected, closing the gap between them. Her face was dead, emotionless, mechanical, like something hollow wearing skin. "You were a favorite," Margaret said. It's always the ones with light, the ones the darkness wants most. Mary's breath hitched. "Let her see," Catherine said. "Let her understand." Margaret turned, knelt by the trapdoor, and, without a word, unlocked it with a key hidden in the folds of her sash. The hinges groaned open. Blackness, not the darkness of night, the wet darkness, airless, heavy, a place that did not want to be seen. From below came a sound, not mechanical, not human, like breathing, but wrong. And then, a single voice from beneath. Is it my turn?" It was Sister Claire's voice, but not from the records room, from below. Mary gasped, looked back toward where Claire had been hiding earlier, but the crates were empty. "She never left," Catherine said, her face serene. "None of them do. Their bodies vanish, but their souls—" She stepped aside, gesturing toward the open hatch. "You came here seeking truth, Sister Mary. It lives down there, if you are brave enough to see it." Mary stared at the hole. The breath from beneath came again, louder this time, wet and rhythmic. "What you were ends here." She did not remember moving. One moment, Mary was standing over the hatch, breath caught between instinct and faith. The next, she was descending, wooden rungs slick with moisture, every step a betrayal of reason. The lantern in her hand flickered violently as if resisting the descent. She no longer cared. She had to see. She had to know. The trapdoor closed above her with a soft finality. She paused, halfway between two worlds. Below, a dim tunnel veined with roots and mildew. Behind her, silence. She stepped down. The earth pressed in close, the walls so tight she could barely move without her robes brushing both sides. The air reeked of soil and rot, and something else. Something sweet, cloying, like dried blood beneath perfume. Then the sounds began, a scraping, not loud, but deliberate, like fingernails across stone. Then whispers, too faint to make out words, but female, layered, as if dozens of mouths whispered at once, just out of reach. Mary's lantern dimmed further, fighting to stay alive. Suddenly, the tunnel opened into a small chamber carved roughly from the earth. The walls were lined with niches, too small for beds, too crude for cells. Inside each, cloth, bone, teeth. Personal items that once belonged to nuns she had known. Sister Agnes's wooden rosary, Teresa's comb, Bernardet's shoes, all placed with careful reverence, like trophies or offerings. And in the center, a stone altar. No cross, just a deep groove along the top, stained dark. Mary dropped the lantern. It shattered, spilling flame and oil across the chamber floor. For a heartbeat, the chamber lit up, and she saw them. Dozens of faces in the walls. Not corpses. Living, preserved. Watching, their eyes open, unblinking. They had been buried standing upright, mouths sewn shut, hands clasped in mock prayer. A moment later, the flame died. But the eyes remain. And they begged to stay, came a voice behind her, calm, conversational. It was Mother Catherine. She stood at the edge of the light, her habit now wet with earth, her eyes hollowed by candle shadow. They were never taken. They offered themselves, as all daughters of the veil must do. Mary stepped back, but the eyes watched. The tunnel behind her seemed to close, the air tightening like a grip around her throat. "Why?" she choked. Mother Catherine smiled. "Because holiness is not submission. It is surrender, not to man, but to what lies beneath." Then, a soft knock. 3 taps from within the altar. Slow, rhythmic, alive. The knock came again. 3 deliberate raps from within the altar. Not echoing, not reverberation. Intentional, alive. Mary froze. Every survival instinct screamed at her to run, but her body would not obey. Her limbs felt heavy. Her breath shallow. Time had become thick, like molasses around her. Mother Catherine stepped forward, the candle in her hand guttering violently. Its light stretched her shadow across the burial chamber, long and crooked, like the wings of something once divine, now fallen. "Each knock is a vow," she said, voice no longer entirely her own. "Each knock, a soul remembering its offering." The words vibrated strangely, not in the air, but in Mary's bones. She looked around. The walls, the faces, the sewn mouths and rosaries. Not relics. Warnings. This was no tomb. It was containment. A cage. "This isn't faith," Mary whispered. "This is desecration." Mother Catherine's face twitched, not with anger, with delight. "Faith is a veil, sister," she murmured, "and veils were made to cover eyes, not protect them." Then the humming began, low, viscous, as if the very earth had begun to speak. It pulsed through the walls into the floor. Not music, not speech, but something between. Voices emerged, not chanting, but layered syllables in impossible tongues, Latin turned backwards, vowels breaking mid-word. Mary gripped her rosary. It pulsed, wet. She looked down. The beads were melting, warm, red, sticky, wax. A memory surfaced, a story her grandmother had whispered in Belfast, of waxen saints and prayers too heavy for heaven, of rosaries that trapped souls, not saved them, and now hers bled silently in her hand. "You were chosen, Sister Mary," Catherine said, placing a cold palm over her heart. "Not for your piety, but for your silence. You watched, you endured. That makes you worthy." Suddenly, the knock stopped, to scratch, from inside the altar, long, deep, desperate. Something inside it was awake, and it wanted out. Mary stumbled backward, her heel striking something soft. A cloth, a curtain. Behind it, a stairwell, spiraling downward. Stone steps swallowed by blackness, moist air rising like breath from a mouth too wide to see. She turned to flee, but the tunnel was gone. The trap door, the ladder, the way back. Roots, vines like tendons had grown where the passage once was. The earth itself had sealed her in. She faced Catherine. "What is this place?" The older woman stood impossibly still, face flickering in firelight. Not just older, ancient, as if the stone had shaped her, not the other way around. "This," Catherine whispered, "is where the church stores what it cannot destroy." Then she stepped aside and gestured toward the downward stairs. "And now you will witness what it has fed for centuries." She descended the steps, not because she chose to, but because she had to. The air behind her had changed, thickened, pulsing with pressure. It pushed her downward like a hand between her shoulder blades, unseen but unmistakably present. The flame of her candle hissed, flickering wildly in still air that should have been dead. The staircase spiraled deeper than any basement should go. The walls, they weren't built. They were carved. Not by tools, but by rituals. Glyphs, scratches, not decoration, containment. The deeper she went, the colder it became. Not weather cold, Not frost, old cold, tomb cold. The kind buried beneath Babylon, forbidden even in Rome. She thought, what was St. Mary's built on? But the question came too late. Halfway down, she saw them. Candles, hundreds, already lit, lining the stairs like sentinels. As if something, or someone, had expected her for years. And at the bottom, a door. Impossibly wide, impossibly old. She stepped through, and the world changed. The chamber beyond was not a room. It was an organism. The walls pulsed, a rhythm, breathing. Root veins slithered along the stone, black-red, throbbing with sap that gleamed under candlelight. The air smelled like incense and rot and myrrh. Then she saw them. 23. Sisters, kneeling in a perfect circle, robes clean, heads bowed, faces calm, still, but not dead. Their skin was waxen, not with death, but preservation, frozen in a single moment of obedience. Hands clasped, eyes closed. And at the center of the circle, a pit. From that pit, a sound. Not voice, not growl, something in between. A remembering. Mary whispered, "They didn't vanish. They were planted." Behind her, a voice soft as breath. Their vow was eternal. She turned. Mother Catherine stood at the edge of the circle, barefoot, eyes glazed in black oil. Behind her, Sister Margaret, Sister Elizabeth. But the ear faces weren't faces anymore. Features stretched, jaws dislocated, as if reality itself had started to reject them. Catherine spoke. "We gave the church its miracles, and in return, they gave us what lies beneath." Mary's body screamed to run, but the pit began to hum, and the sisters began to rock, gently, lips moving, not in prayer, but in chant. The kind not meant for ears, not anymore. The chant had no melody, yet it consumed the room like music. It was built from syllables not meant for tongues. Their language was older than scripture, older than Latin, older than memory. And as the sisters' mouths moved, their eyes remained shut, as if sight itself would disrupt the ritual. Mary tried to move, but her legs betrayed her. The moment she heard that sound, something inside her fractured. It was like being split down the middle, one part frozen in fear, the other leaning forward, almost longing for what came next. "You were chosen," Mother Catherine said, her voice smooth and final. "The others were offered. You will be opened." The pit pulsed once, a heartbeat. From within, something breathed back. Mary turned her head, trying to look away, but the walls moved. Not metaphorically. They shifted, seamlessly, like flesh responding to touch. The room was no longer square. It had become a throat, and they were inside it. "This isn't consecrated ground," Mary whispered. "This is the reverse of holy." Sister Margaret stepped forward. In her hands, she held a chalice. Not silver, not gold. It looked organic, as if grown from bone, its stem spiraling like a twisted spinal cord. Within, a thick black liquid shimmered unnaturally, like oil slicked over blood. She offered it to Mary. "Drink, and the questions will leave you," she said softly. "You'll remember what the others forgot. You'll remember who you were before the world made you forget." Mary shook her head. "No, it's not a choice," Catherine said. "It's a return." The circle of sisters began to rise. But they didn't use their legs. They floated gently, as if gravity had no hold on them. Their eyes still closed, mouths still murmuring. Mary backed away, but the door she came through was gone. In its place, only stone, pulsing, watching. She did the only thing she could. She ran into the circle, into the forbidden center, into the pit. As her body fell, she expected cold, darkness, bones. But what met her was warmth, like womb heat, and a blinding white that poured into her eyes and mind like liquid fire, and then silence. Not the absence of sound, the absence of everything. She awoke in her bed, alone, drenched in sweat, heart hammering like it was trying to escape her chest. The chapel bell hadn't rung for morning prayer, the usual drone of the sisters' voices echoing through the halls. Absent. Only silence. Not peaceful silence. Not blessed. The kind of silence that follows a scream. Mary sat up, her limbs shaky, her nightdress clinging to her body. She looked around. Her bed was perfectly made. Her shoes were neatly placed beside it. Her prayer book still sat unopened on the small table. It was as if nothing had happened. As if the pit, the circle, the chalice had been a dream. But when she looked down at her hands, she saw it. Ash, embedded beneath her fingernails. Not dirt, not soot. Ash, and the faint imprint of a ring around her wrist where something had held her. She stepped into the hallway. It was empty. Every door closed, every candle extinguished. The air was heavier than usual, like walking through wet wool and incense. She called out, but no voice returned. No footsteps, no whispers, no sisters. Mother Catherine? Sister Elizabeth? Is anyone? A noise behind her, a whisper of fabric. She turned. No one. She descended the stairs toward the infirmary, hoping for signs of life. Even Sister Margaret's quiet disapproval would have been welcome. But when she arrived, the beds were neatly made, the shelves stocked. The air smelled of rosemary and lemon balm, just as it always had. But no one was there. She walked to the orphanage. Again, nothing. The children's toys sat in their proper places, small shoes lined in rows by the fire, blankets folded. No laughter, no crying, no breath. Outside, the garden had been freshly watered. The wheelbarrow sat beside the herb beds, half full of uprooted plants. A hoe leaned against the fence. She stepped closer. That's when she saw it. A single fresh footprint in the mud, barefoot, small. It led toward the woods. Mary followed, her mind a storm of disbelief and dread. They're testing me, she thought. This is part of the penance. But part of her already knew better. This wasn't ritual. This was fallout. As she stepped into the tree line, she heard it again. The chant. Far in the distance. Only now, it wasn't coming from beneath. It was coming from above. She followed the sound through the trees. Not the ordinary woods of Wisconsin. Not anymore. These trees felt wrong. Older than memory. Bark the color of dried blood. Twisted trunks like spines bent under some forgotten weight. The wind didn't rustle the leaves. It hummed through them. A frequency, not a breeze. And the chant? It had changed. No longer Latin. No longer sacred. It was phonetic, primitive, like syllables pulled from the lungs of something that had never spoken before. Mary didn't recognize the language, but her body responded to it. A vertigo of recognition, like waking from a dream you never knew you were dreaming. The path wound deeper, darker. The air grew colder. And then she saw it. A clearing. In its center stood a massive structure of stone and timber, not built but grown. Carved into its surface were symbols older than scripture, etched in a spiral that seemed to move if you stared too long. It was not a chapel, not a church. It was something else, something older than both. The original altar. Surrounding it stood 12 women in black, robes, not habits, barefoot, eyes closed, palms outstretched. Their mouths moved in unison, spilling those ancient syllables into the air. At the center, a 13th figure, Mother Catherine. But not as Mary remembered her. Her habit was gone, replaced by a robe of deep crimson. Her hands bore the marks of seared flesh, a triangle branded into each palm. Her eyes, once pale and piercing, now radiated an unnatural white, like frost on glass. She opened them and looked directly at Mary. "You came," she whispered, though her lips never moved. "We knew you would. You remember now, don't you?" Mary shook her head, backed away. "You were chosen long before the sea crossing," Mother Catherine continued, her voice now inside Mary's mind. "Before Ireland, before Rome, before the name Mary meant anything at all." One of the robed women stepped forward, Sister Margaret. She held in her hands a chalice, identical to the one from the chamber below, but this time it was filled. A thick, black liquid, steaming in the cold air. "This is your true communion," she said softly. Mary turned to run, but the woods behind her had closed, trees tangled into a wall of thorns. The sky above no longer showed stars, just a swirling void, like a hole punched through heaven. "You can't run from blood," Mother Catherine's voice echoed. "Especially your own." Mary's scream never left her lips. It coiled inside her like a trapped animal, clawing for release, swallowed by the impossibility of the moment. This wasn't revelation. It was recognition. Somewhere deep beneath her fear, beneath the pounding blood in her ears and the tremble in her knees, a voice, her own voice, whispered, "You've been here before." The women in the circle began to chant louder. Their hands rose in perfect synchrony, fingers twitching as if pulling invisible strings. Mary's body reacted before her mind did, feet staggering backward, hands grasping for something solid. But the forest was gone. The world had folded inward, replaced by stone, breath, and ritual. Mother Catherine stepped forward, no longer a woman, not in the ordinary sense. Her face seemed both ancient and ageless, each line etched by centuries of ritual, pain, and power. "We needed you to forget," she said. "That was the only way you'd return of your own will." "I never came here," Mary croaked. "This is madness. I was born in 1833 in County Cork. You were born," Catherine cut her off, "in fire, beneath a moonless sky, swaddled in ash and prophecy. They named you Mary later, but your true name," she raised the chalice, "is not meant for human tongues." The liquid inside bubbled. Mary backed away again until she felt the cold grip of fingers on her arms. Two robed sisters had stepped from the circle, holding her now, gently but with undeniable strength. Their eyes were not hostile. They were grieving, as if mourning what she was about to become. Mother Catherine lifted the chalice. "This is not punishment," she said. "It is remembrance. What you are, what we are, has been buried beneath centuries of false scripture. They stole our rights, demonized our sacraments, called us witches, heretics, madwomen. But we are older than Rome, older than Christ." The chalice touched Mary's lips. She thrashed, twisted, fought, but the liquid burned through her tongue with the force of memory. Suddenly, she saw them, all of them. The 23 missing nuns, Their faces, their final moments, their transfigurations. Not killed, not taken, changed, becoming something else, willingly in most cases, coerced in others. Each one marked, branded, bound to a purpose that defied words. A purpose Mary had now become part of. A purpose she would soon remember completely. Mary awoke in silence. No chanting, no fire, no circle of women. Just the steady drip of water from above and the raw ache in her throat, as if she had been screaming for hours into stone. Her body was stiff, cold. She tried to move, but her limbs obeyed with delay, like a marionette relearning the pull of strings. Around her, darkness, but not total. A faint amber glow pulsed from the walls, as if veins ran through the stone, filled with liquid memory. The floor beneath her was smooth, worn by time, and damp with something not entirely water. She wasn't alone. A figure sat in the corner of the chamber, cloaked, still, watching. "You're awake," it said. The voice was female, tired, familiar. "Who are you?" Mary whispered. The figure leaned into the dim glow. It was Sister Margaret, older, paler, but unmistakable. "You've crossed the veil," she said. "Few return the first time. Fewer remember what they saw." Mary's head pounded. The images, the circle, the chalice, the burning behind her eyes, they flashed like knives in her mind. "Was it real?" she asked. Sister Margaret smiled, but there was no comfort in it. "More real than this place," she said. Mary tried to stand. Her legs buckled. Margaret caught her. "Easy," she said. "Your body's rejecting the memory. It will pass." "I saw them," Mary murmured. "All of them. The missing sisters." "They're not missing," Margaret said softly. "They're awakened." Mary gripped the wall. "What does that mean?" "It means they remembered who they were before the church, before the veil of obedience was stitched into our skin, before the patriarchy carved obedience into scripture." She paused. "And now, you've been chosen to carry that lineage forward." "No," Mary said, shaking her head. "I'm just a teacher. I wanted history, not mythology." "History is mythology," Margaret replied. "Sanitized, rewritten." "You think the church chronicled what it feared? No, it buried it. And in these walls, in you, it's waking up." Mary stared into the pulsing glow of the stone. It seemed to respond to her heartbeat. "You should rest," Margaret said. "What comes next will demand everything." And with that, Margaret disappeared into a narrow passage hidden in the rock. Mary was alone again, except she wasn't. Because something had followed her back from the veil. Something ancient and now awake. The chapel bells rang at 3:00 a.m. Their sound, once a gentle call to prayer, now pierced the soul like a blade. The tone had changed, hollow, warped, as if the metal remembered what it had witnessed underground. Mary stood in the main hall of the convent, staring at the cracked crucifix that hung over the chapel doors. Christ's face was worn down, his eyes nearly erased. It looked less like salvation and more like surrender. The other sisters moved through their routines, but something was off. Their steps were synchronized, mechanical, not a word spoken, not a glance exchanged. Mary whispered a prayer out of instinct, but it tasted foreign on her tongue. Something inside her had shifted. After her return from the chamber below, she hadn't spoken to anyone except Margaret. She tried to find Sister Elizabeth, but her quarters were empty, scrubbed clean, as if she had never existed. Mother Catherine had not been seen in days, and yet the convent still obeyed her. Mary passed Sister Ruth in the corridor. The young novice's eyes were dull, not with exhaustion, but as if something had been drained from her. She walked barefoot, her hands clasped, humming a hymn in a language Mary didn't recognize. The nuns were not asleep. They were being remade. Down in the laundry room, Mary found Sister Teresa's rosary. Half burned, wrapped in a bundle of hair. She clenched it in her fist, heart racing. That's when she heard it again. The whisper. Not through ears, but through bone. It came from the walls, the floors, the marrow. She has not left. She has only changed. Mary turned and saw the oldest nun, Sister Johanna, standing in the shadows. She hadn't spoken in years, but now her voice came clear as glass. Mother Catherine did not create this place. She answered it. You think she commands us, but she's just the first to kneel to something older. Mary stepped closer. What is it? Sister Johanna lifted her veil. Her eyes were white, not blind, washed, cleansed of self. It's the sound beneath the silence, she whispered. The thing that sings when prayers stop. It called us here, before the church, before the land had a name. Mary staggered back, chills erupting across her skin. What does it want? Johanna smiled, her teeth cracked like old bone. To be remembered. And then she walked away, disappearing down a corridor Mary had never seen before, a corridor that hadn't been there yesterday. It started snowing that night. Thick, unnatural flakes that fell without sound, blanketing the convent in a stillness so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing. No birds, no wind, no passing wagons on the distant road, just white, suffocating, endless white. Mary lit a lantern and moved quietly through the east wing. Her heart pounded like a drum trapped inside a coffin. She no longer prayed. She no longer asked for strength. That part of her, the part that trusted light, had died 3 nights ago. Now she listened for the rhythm, the hidden metronome that pulsed beneath the walls. She entered the former orphanage dormitory. The beds were empty, sheets stripped, walls scraped clean. But the smell remained, not of children, but of metal and mildew and ash. There, on the far wall, carved deep into the stone with fingernails, or worse, a phrase. In service to the Mother of Return. Below it, dozens of scratches, not symbols, tally marks. She counted. 23. The exact number of nuns who transferred. Her legs gave out. She fell to her knees, sobbing, not out of fear, but clarity. The story wasn't about religious discipline or harsh penance or distant reassignments. It was about offering, an offering they had become. The chapel bell rang again. Once. She looked at her watch, 3:33 a.m. It had never struck at that hour before. Mary stumbled to her feet, lantern shaking. She moved toward the chapel, her breath fogging as if the air itself was rejecting her presence. Inside, the nuns were gathered, but not in prayer. They stood in a circle, arms raised, eyes closed. In the center, a basin of water, black, thick, and steaming. Margaret stood nearest to it, her fingers dipped inside. Mother Catherine stood behind them all. She was wearing red, not crimson of the church, but deep, arterial red, the shade of clotting blues. Her face was serene, transcendent. She turned to Mary and spoke with a calm that chilled the bones. You made it back. That means you're ready. Mary shook her head. Ready for what? Mother Catherine smiled. To remember who you were before the world lied to you, before your name was given, before you were taught to fear what you are. You think we serve God here? She leaned close. No, child. We keep him out. Mary stepped backward, the lantern trembling in her hand. casting shaking shadows on the chapel's stone walls. The circle of nuns did not move. Their arms stayed raised. Their eyes remained closed, as if caught in a trance older than language. Only Margaret moved, stirring the black basin with fingers that looked boneless now, like wet rope coiled in the water. "This isn't real," Mary whispered. But she could feel it. Not as thought, but as weight, as pressure in her chest, like her lungs were being taught a new rhythm, one she had no say in. Mother Catherine stepped forward, her footsteps perfectly silent. "You still think there is a difference between reality and ritual," she said. "That's why it still hurts." Mary gripped the crucifix around her neck, the metal now strangely warm, almost soft. "There were 23 of them. Where did they go?" she asked. Catherine tilted her head like a mother indulging a naive child. "They were taken," she said, "but not by us. Not how you think." She pointed to the ceiling, to the wooden beams blackened with soot from countless candles. "You think this place is a chapel? It's a capstone, a lock, Mary. And locks don't keep things out. They keep things in." Mary's mind began to race. The disappearances, the strange sounds, the dreams that bled into waking, the mirror that no longer reflected her properly, the days she forgot whole hours, whole people. "You let something out," she breathed. Catherine nodded slowly. "Not let, welcomed. It was always here, beneath the roots of the land. We simply remembered its name." She turned to the circle of nuns and whispered a sound, not a word, but a chord, a deep, dissonant vibration that made Mary's teeth ache. The nuns opened their eyes in unison. Their irises were gone, replaced by a dull, flickering gray like the last light of a dying candle. Mary turned and ran. Down in the nave, past the broken pews, through the heavy oak doors that didn't want to open. She sprinted into the snow, breath heaving, barefoot, lantern discarded. Behind her, the bell rang again. 3 times, then silence, until she heard the whispers, not from the chapel, but from the woods. Dozens of voices, speaking in unison, in a language her bones recognized but her mind couldn't process. Calling her name, her real name, the one she had never been told. They say Sister Mary Collins was found 3 days later, barefoot and frostbitten, standing at the edge of Lake Michigan. Her eyes were wide open, unblinking, fixed not on the water, but on something far beyond it. Her lips were cracked and blue, yet moving constantly, whispering a phrase the rescuers could not understand, a phrase she never stopped repeating, even after the convent burned. St. Mary's was declared an accident, a fault in the infirmary's stove, they said. The flames were too fast, too complete. 26 bodies were found, 26 charred skeletons in perfect lines. But there had been 32 nuns, according to the last diocesan records. 6 were missing. The bishop said the fire erased their remains. Locals whispered different things. That strange lights had been seen rising from the convent rooftop the night before, spinning like a wheel, that the dogs in nearby farms howled and clawed at the earth until their paws bled, that in the weeks after the fire, trees around the old chapel withered despite the spring thaw, and the ground refused to grow even weeds. Mary Collins was never the same. Some say she was taken to a sanitarium in Chicago where she lived in silence until her death in 1911. But a few believe she left on her own, that she crossed into the forest one last time, not running from something, but toward it. Her journals were recovered decades later, hidden beneath the floorboards of her childhood home in upstate New York. They were filled with sketches, of symbols, of faces with no eyes, of a chapel that seemed to breathe, and lines repeated like ritual. It hides behind devotion. They speak without sound. Obedience opens the gate. We were not praying. We were feeding it. The convent was never rebuilt. The land was sold, abandoned, then purchased again by a silent trust based in Rome. It remains fenced off. P.